Good afternoon, good evening, students. I hope you're doing good. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're back with another video. As you requested, I decided to start a new chapter entitled Sociolinguistics. This course will be divided into many parts, thus many videos. Of course, this is because I cannot cover everything in one long video, and that would be boring for you as well. Anyways, before I start, as usual, I invite you to like the Facebook page of this channel in order to be notified whenever I post something new, and also subscribe to my channel if it's not already done. That would encourage me to do more and help you out during the period of exams. With that being said, we shall start with the first lecture. So in this video, we are going to start with basic concepts that you guys need to know if you want to carry on with this course. So we will define what do we mean by sociolinguistics, right? What do we mean by variability of language and multiplicity of language forms? And of course, what do we mean by dialectology? And the difference between micro-sociolinguistics and macro-sociolinguistics. Then after that, we shall move to language variation, and this will be the main course of today. I decided to give you these concepts because a lot of you might not know what do you mean by variability of language or multiplicity of language forms, and these concepts, you need to know them, you need to learn them if you want to understand other lectures or other courses related to sociolinguistics. So what is sociolinguistics? It is the study of language in relation to society. We have socio, which comes from the word sociology, and we have the word linguistics. So I'm sure that you all know what do we mean by linguistics. There is a common or a universal definition for the word, which is a scientific study of language. I have also explained this in my previous videos concerning linguistics. Feel free to check them out if you don't understand what do you mean by linguistics, of course. And then there is what we call sociology. So what is sociology? Sociology is the study of societies and how humans act in groups. And these groups share the same customs, laws, organizations, languages, religion, etc., etc. Okay, so this is the idea behind sociology. So we have society on one hand, and we have language on the other hand. Sociolinguistics is the study of language in relation to society, right? And since we have divided sociology and linguistics, so the principles of these two disciplines are found in sociolinguistics, and these principles give importance to two things: variability of language and multiplicity of language forms. What do we mean by variability of language? It is the coexistence of many languages around the world. For example, we have French language, we have English, we have Arabic, Spanish, Italian, and a lot of other languages around the world. This is what we mean by variability of languages, meaning there are many languages around the world. Then we have multiplicity of language forms. This means that there is one language which has different variations, or what we call dialects, right? For instance, if you take Arabic, there is classical Arabic. This is the unique language, if I may say, but the word unique, or saying that there is a language which is better than another one, is quite debated. But we can give it this definition of the unique language, which is classical Arabic, which has different variations, right? For instance, the Algerian dialect, the Moroccan dialect, and also the Tunisian dialect. And of course, in another context, we have the Berber, which is also a language of North Africa. It has several variations. For instance, we have Shawi, Kabyle, Mzabi, and Turgi, right? So this is the difference between variability of language and multiplicity of language forms. So variability means the coexistence of different languages. Multiplicity of language forms, it is one language which has different variations or dialects, right? In linguistics, not sociolinguistics, linguistics alone, the field studies language structure, okay, which means we study phonology, semantics, morphology, syntax. All these aspects of linguistics are studied. So linguistics describes language generally and in an abstract way, which means something that we cannot see. If I tell you, for instance, the sound, the letter P is pronounced P in phonology. This is something that you can relate to, something you understand, but it is something you cannot see, you cannot experiment. But sociolinguistics, on the other hand, it deals with real life language issues in a social context, right? Many topics are covered. For instance, we have first regional variation that we are going to see in this video. We have social variation, we have language and age, we have language and gender, language attitudes, etc. These are issues between society and language, and sociolinguistics is there to deal with these issues, right? Now, what is dialectology, or what do we mean by dialect? Basically, it is the study of language variation of the same language, just like the example I've given before. So dialectology is the study of language variations of the same language. For instance, we have Arabic, like I said. We have then, this is the first language. Then we have variations of this language, which are, for instance, Algerian dialect, Tunisian dialect, right? And a dialect, the word dialect, is the variation itself, okay? Then we have micro-sociolinguistics and macro-sociolinguistics. This is just for your own general knowledge. You need to know that micro-sociolinguistics finds interest in understanding the social aspect of language, which means trying to understand the variation. What is the reason of the emergence of these variations, right? Whereas macro-sociolinguistics, it is a matter of choice, right? Why societies, or what societies do with their languages. So it's a matter of choice of these societies to change the way their languages look. For instance, the way old people use language, right? The way gender is perceived along with language. For instance, the way how women use language and how men use language. And there's also the notion or the issue of social class. If you go to Britain, especially a long time ago, especially during the Victorian era, there is some kind of difference between the working class and the upper class in terms of language use, right? So this is the difference between micro-sociolinguistics and macro-sociolinguistics, okay? Then we move to language variation. What is language variation? When you speak about language variation, it means dialect, right? Directly. It means dialect, or sometimes called vernacular. A dialect is a variety of the same language spoken in one part of the country. For instance, we take, again, our country, Algeria. We have Classical Arabic, which is the language, and Classical Arabic has its own dialect, which is the Algerian dialect, right? Both of these two languages are spoken in one country, which is Algeria. This is what we call a regional dialect, okay? And if these or this variety is spoken by a particular social class, we call it a sociolect, all right? And in order to make the difference between the language and its variety, sometimes it can appear in pronunciation, grammar, and word choice, or if you want, vocabulary. Okay? So where do we find this kind of variation in language? First, we have the first type, which is regional dialect. Okay? If you have a language in a country, and this language, of course, is shared by a lot of people, this language, again, will spread across that country. And the larger the geographical distance between people, or between groups of people, since we're speaking about communities, the greater chance we have to find differences between the dialects. In other words, you have a large country, and at first these people spoke one language, and as the country develops, this language spreads along with its people, right? So these people sometimes will lose contact with other people, and therefore they start developing their own dialect. And you will see that the first language that has ever existed in that country is different from these dialects that were developed through time, okay? And of course, these dialects or this kind of change or this kind of variation did not happen like randomly. There is, or we have reasons. First, we have language contact. If you take, for instance, Canadian English and British English, Canadian English tends to look more like American English, whereas British English looks more like the European languages, especially French. Okay? This is what we call language contact. The first point or the first reason of this variation is due to language contact. You see, United States of America is closer to Canada. Therefore, there is contact between a certain contact between the two countries, either for trade or something else. So they exchange information, which means they communicate. Therefore, Canada took or adopted this American tendency, okay? Whereas British English or Britain is closer to France and Europe in general. Therefore, British English has European tendencies. Okay? Then the second reason is the natural barrier. For instance, in Japan, we have a great geographical variation. We have mountains, deserts, hills, or oceans. These are factors of geographical variation, okay? And these are considered to be a natural barrier, okay? When I say natural barrier, if you have two communities that are separated by a mountain, this means that these two communities or these two groups are not going to communicate between each other, right? Therefore, what happens is they develop their own dialect. I am no longer affected by another group, so they start to drift, both of them start to drift from the previous language that they acquired. This is what we call the natural barrier. Then we have political barrier. The political barrier, there is one example that I personally didn't know about until recently. If you take Gambia and Senegal, A long time ago, they were part of one kingdom named Saloum. This place or this kingdom is characterized by having a common language. And this language is named Wolof. Again, sorry if I didn't pronounce it correctly. After the colonizer, after imperialism, and when you had Europeans colonizing Africa, so they imposed their political power and everything. They made boundaries between Gambia and Senegal, although they used to be part of the same kingdom. After independence, Senegal and Gambia became two independent nations, or nation states if you want, and they have maintained French and English as official languages, and not Wolof, which was supposed to be the common language of the two countries. So this is the political barrier. There is some kind of political power which will push people to adopt a specific dialect or a language as far as it is concerned. So this is about regional dialect. Then we have the social dialect. The social dialect is related to society. Okay. People differ in their way of speaking according to their social, economic, and educational status. Right? For instance, a person who is educated uses language differently from someone who is illiterate. Another example, a professor uses language different from an artist. Therefore, we say that a professor's dialect is different from an artist's, right? In other words, what we understand from this is your educational level determines the level and type of your companionship. If you are a doctor, you are going to use language differently than someone who is a teacher, for instance. And all doctors follow the same tendency. In other words, your educational level or the speaker's educational level determines the level and type of their companionship. So this is as far as social dialect is concerned. Then we have individual dialect. You should know that every person has what we call dialect, right? A language like English, spoken natively by about 500 million people, it has in fact 500 million distinct dialects, which means every individual will speak English in their own manner. This is what we call dialects. So let alone people who speak language as or speak English as foreigners. Okay, it is impossible to find two persons speaking a language in the exact same way. There should be a difference, and this is actually related to some physical features dependent on the physiology of the speaker's vocal system. There are speech characteristics that are special to every single speaker. So let alone as well those who have disabilities or sorts of problems in their vocal system, right? So the idea is every person has his or her own dialect, okay? And this is called dialect. And we have racial dialect. For instance, you take the English spoken in the United States of America by the Afro-Americans. It is called Black English, okay? So Afro-Americans have their own dialect called Black English. Turks in Germany have developed Turkish German, okay? It is a dialect resulted from German influenced by Turkish. And of course, USA is one of the best examples to give about racial dialect, because it is a country where we find a lot of immigrants, and every immigrant minority develops special racial dialect. For instance, we have Vietnamese English, Spanglish, Mexican English, and of course, like I said, the Black English. Okay? Then we have professional dialect. This is related to the jargon. See, every profession has its own and unique terminology. For instance, engineers speak in a way that psychologists or lawyers cannot. If you take the vocabulary that a lawyer uses or an engineer, it's not the same. This is what we call professional dialect. It is mainly related to the jargon, because each jargon has its own vocabulary, or what we call lexicon. Okay. And at the end, we will round off with colloquial and standard dialects. This is mainly related to the CD and SD. Okay. So every language we have, like, it can either be an SD, which means a standard dialect, or it can be a CD, colloquial dialect. Okay. The standard dialect is used in science, literature, formal writings, university lectures, speeches, also something that is related to religion sometimes. And the colloquial dialect, on the other hand, is usually spoken at home, streets, between friends, between families, something that is informal, right? The colloquial dialect, or the CD, is characterized by short sentences, simple structure, and frequent vocabulary. The standard dialect and, of course, the colloquial dialect are complementary. Okay? Which means if you use one of them, the other one cannot be used. And it depends on the people of a given country to decide whether to put a language as a standard dialect or a colloquial dialect. That would be it for today's lecture. I hope I have introduced the lecture to you quite efficiently. If you have any question, feel free to ask me in the comments below or message me on my Facebook page. Otherwise, I tell you, see you in the next video. Peace.